I trusted her to help save my broken marriage, but the therapist I opened my heart to was secretly sleeping with my husband while pretending to fix us. Our marriage didn't fall apart overnight. It was quiet, gradual, like a slow leak in a tire, barely noticeable at first, until one day you're stranded on the side of the road wondering how you got there. I'm Lauren, 34 years old, and I teach English at a local middle school. I've always been the kind of woman who gives her all to her family. I believe in loyalty, in showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So when my marriage to Ben, my husband of 7 years, started to shift, I didn't run. I held on tighter. Ben is 36, a structural engineer, smart, well-respected, and honestly incredibly charming. People love him. He has this calm, dependable energy that makes everyone trust him. On paper, he's the perfect husband. Handsome, successful, articulate, and polite. The kind of man mothers would brag about to their friends. And for a long time, I believed I had the fairy tale. But recently, it stopped feeling like a marriage and more like a performance, a routine we'd memorized. He'd say love you out of habit, not affection. We'd eat dinner in silence, argue about toothpaste, then sleep on opposite sides of the bed, pretending the distance wasn't there. We weren't screaming, we weren't cheating, but we weren't us anymore. It broke my heart because I wanted this to work. I didn't just want to be someone's wife. I wanted to be his wife. The version of us that used to laugh until we cried. The version that danced barefoot in the kitchen after too much wine. But she was gone, and I didn't know how to bring her back. So I made the first move. I suggested couples therapy. I was nervous he'd take it the wrong way or get defensive. But to my surprise, he agreed almost immediately. Maybe it's worth a try, he said. That was more enthusiasm than I'd seen from him in months. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. That's how we ended up sitting on a soft leather couch in a softly lit office, facing Dr. Ava Peterson. Ava was everything you'd expect from a top-tier therapist. Late 30s, effortlessly elegant, with a calm and thoughtful way of speaking that instantly made you feel seen. She had a reputation for helping even the most disconnected couples find their way back. And honestly, I could see why. She was warm, intelligent, intuitive, and yes, physically striking in that graceful, understated way. From the very first session, I felt a strange mix of relief and vulnerability. I was opening my heart to a stranger, hoping she'd help us untangle the knots we'd tied ourselves into. And more than anything, I was grateful. Because for the first time in years, Ben talked. Not surface-level stuff. Real things. He admitted he'd been feeling stuck, emotionally drained, like life had turned into a checklist instead of a journey. It was hard to hear, but it was honest. And honesty felt like progress. I remember sitting there, watching him speak, not to me, but about us, and thinking, we might actually have a chance. I admired Ava for that. She seemed to know exactly when to lean in and when to pull back. She never took sides. She didn't push blame. She just opened space. And Ben walked right into it. But as the sessions went on, something started to feel off. Ben's attitude toward therapy shifted, drastically. He wasn't just showing up, he was eager, almost too eager. He started insisting on arriving early, saying he wanted to clear his head before the session. Then he'd linger afterward, saying he needed to talk something over privately with Ava. I didn't question it at first. If anything, I was relieved that he was finally participating, finally showing up for our marriage. But then came the comments. She really gets it, he'd say, or Ava made such an insightful point today. Once, he even said, I feel like I can finally talk to someone who understands me. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that I was being insecure, that I should be happy he was invested. But there was a subtle shift I couldn't ignore, the way his tone softened when he talked about her, the way he brought her up even outside of therapy, how he stopped talking to me and started quoting her. I remember one night in the kitchen, I teased him, lightly, playfully. Sounds like you've got a bit of a therapist crush. He laughed. But it was short, tight, forced. And then he changed the subject. That was the first time I felt the knot in my stomach. I brushed it off, told myself I was reading too much into things. After all, Ava was a professional. This was therapy, not a romantic comedy. I didn't want to be the jealous wife inventing drama because things were finally starting to move forward. But even as I smiled and nodded, some part of me, the quiet part, the one that lives under all the logic and reason, was whispering something I didn't want to hear. Something was off, and I didn't know what to do with that feeling. I didn't go looking for the truth. It found me, quietly, suddenly, and without warning, like a slap I never saw coming. One evening, Ben was in the shower, and his phone lit up on the nightstand. Normally, I never touched it. I respected his privacy. But something about the name on the screen made my heart skip a beat. Ava Peterson. It wasn't a professional reminder or a calendar alert. It was a message. Just one line, but it changed everything. Still thinking about our little moment this afternoon. You looked incredible in that shirt. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. My first reaction wasn't rage, it was confusion, disbelief. Maybe it was a joke, maybe there was some explanation. I reread it over and over, hoping it would mean something different the third time. It didn't. When Ben came out of the shower, I forced a smile. I acted like nothing had happened. My hands were trembling, but I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My mind was screaming, but my mouth wouldn't move. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling, heart racing. Something inside me cracked wide open. All the little signs I'd ignored, the long sessions, the way he spoke about her, the early arrivals and late stays. They all came rushing back like a tidal wave. And now, I couldn't pretend anymore. The next day, I began watching closely. I didn't accuse him. I didn't even confront him. I simply observed. Quiet. Careful. My stomach was in knots all the time. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus at work. I felt like I was living in someone else's life, a stranger's nightmare. Then I did something I never thought I would. I followed him. One Friday afternoon, he told me he had a work meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. My heart already knew that was a lie. So I waited 15 minutes, grabbed my coat, and drove downtown. I didn't know what I was hoping to see. Maybe I still wanted to be wrong. I parked across the street from a high-end restaurant we'd been to once on our anniversary. It wasn't a place you'd go for a casual business dinner. I waited. And then I saw them, Ben and Ava. She looked effortlessly beautiful, wearing a soft beige dress that hugged her figure. He leaned in as they talked, his hand brushing hers on the table. They laughed, deep, familiar laughter, the kind that comes from intimacy. I sat frozen in my car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. But the final blow came when she reached across and touched his face, gently, lovingly. That's when I knew. I drove home in a daze. My hands were cold, my mouth dry. I couldn't cry, not yet. It was like my body had shut down, trying to protect me from what I had just seen. Later that night, after hours of pacing the living room, I decided I couldn't hold it in anymore. I waited for him to come home. As soon as he stepped through the door, I said it, calm, direct. I know about you and Ava. His face went pale, completely drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see the panic rise in his eyes, the way his breath caught in his throat. Before he could deny it, I added, I saw you. At the restaurant. Silence. Then he did something I didn't expect. He sat down, buried his face in his hands, and whispered, I'm sorry. That was worse than a lie, because it meant everything I feared was true. A few minutes later, Ava arrived. Yes, she came to our house. Apparently they had talked earlier, and he had told her I found out. She walked in like she belonged there, composed, not a trace of guilt in her eyes. I confronted her too. You were supposed to help us. You were supposed to fix us. My voice cracked. How could you? She looked at me with what I can only describe as calm detachment. Sometimes connections happen. You can't control feelings. Her tone was almost clinical, like she was discussing someone else's marriage, not the one she personally helped destroy. Ben tried to speak, to explain. It wasn't supposed to happen, it just did. We connected. She listened. I felt seen for the first time in years. That last part shattered me, because I had tried. I had begged him to talk to me, to let me in. And the one time he finally did, it wasn't with me, it was with her. Then came the final cruel twist. He admitted it had started right after our first therapy session. I stood there, feeling like my world had cracked open. Everything I thought was healing had actually been the beginning of the end. I wasn't just betrayed by my husband. I was betrayed by the very woman I trusted to help us. A professional. Someone I welcomed into our most vulnerable moments. And I had brought him to her. I had handed him over on a silver platter, thinking I was saving our marriage. The self-blame was unbearable. I replayed everything in my head. Every decision, every word I said in those sessions. I questioned whether I had been blind, foolish, too trusting. At night, I couldn't sleep. I would lie in the dark, rage burning in my chest, tears soaking my pillow, while the man I loved lay next to me. His betrayal etched into my memory like a scar I couldn't scrub out. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was humiliation. It was the kind of pain that sits deep in your bones, the kind that makes you question who you are. Because when the two people you trusted most turn out to be the ones tearing your life apart, what's left? Ending a marriage is nothing like the movies. There's no dramatic music, no perfect words, just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. After everything I discovered, after seeing Ben and Ava together, hearing the truth, the betrayal, the lies, I still found myself staring at the ceiling night after night, wondering if I had the strength to walk away. But deep down, I knew staying would mean losing myself, and I had already lost too much. So one morning, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, looking at the man I once called my home, and I said it. Calm, final. I want a divorce. He looked up, startled. Lauren, wait, please, don't do this. His voice cracked, his eyes wide, desperate, but I didn't flinch. I had cried enough. I had begged, blamed, grieved. I was done. You made your choice, I told him. Now I'm making mine. At first, he tried everything, apologies, explanations, excuses. He said it was a mistake, that he didn't mean for it to go that far, that he still loved me. But love without respect is just noise. And I wasn't going to live in a house where I had to question my worth every single day. I walked away that week, packed my things, signed the papers. I felt empty, but somehow also powerful. Like I was finally standing up for the woman I used to be. But the strength didn't last long. In the weeks that followed, I hit one of the lowest points in my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I'd burst into tears in the middle of the grocery store just because someone said, "Have a nice day." I stopped answering texts. I shut the curtains. I drowned in silence. There were days I didn't even get out of bed. Days when I felt like I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. I had poured everything I had into a marriage that crumbled right in front of me. And now I was left with the ruins. I think the worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was the self-blame. The voice in my head that whispered, "You should have seen it coming. You should have been enough. You let this happen." But slowly, so slowly, I realized I couldn't do it alone. One afternoon, my best friend Emily showed up at my doorstep with coffee and a bag of groceries. She didn't ask questions. She just hugged me and sat on the floor while I cried. My sister called every night, even if all we did was sit in silence. My coworkers gently nudged me back into the rhythm of school. And piece by piece, I started to breathe again. I began focusing on work, finding comfort in my students and lesson plans. I signed up for a beginner's yoga class, not because I was flexible, but because I needed a reason to leave the house. I started taking weekend trips to nearby towns I'd never explored, wandering through bookshops, eating alone in quiet cafes, reclaiming space for myself. I wasn't healed overnight, but I was healing. Then came the message. Ben reached out, said he missed me, that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, that Ava wasn't what he thought she was. She didn't want anything serious. She moved on quickly, cold, detached, clinical. just like how she'd looked at me that night in my living room. He said he finally saw what he had lost, that no one knew him like I did, that he wanted to fix things, start fresh. For a moment, I felt that familiar ache in my chest, that little voice that used to say, maybe there's still a chance. But it was gone as quickly as it came, because I remembered the nights I cried alone while he laid beside me like a stranger. I remembered the way he looked at her across that dinner table. I remembered how I doubted my own sanity, how I begged for scraps of affection while he handed his heart to someone else. So I told him the truth. No, Ben, I'm not coming back. I didn't say it with anger. I said it with clarity, with peace, because by then I had finally remembered who I was, before the pain, before the lies, before the guilt. And I knew I deserved more than what he ever gave me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living again. I never imagined that losing everything would be the thing that set me free. In the months after the divorce, I poured myself into rebuilding. Not just my routines or my home, but me. The version of myself that had been chipped away over years of trying to hold on to a love that no longer saw me. Slowly, I started to feel stronger. I focused on my job and found myself rising quickly, earning the respect of my colleagues, mentoring younger teachers, even leading curriculum changes I'd always dreamed about. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself not just as a wife or a woman, but as me, whole and independent. I began to enjoy my reflection again. It wasn't just about looking good. It was the way I carried myself. There was something new in my eyes, clarity, strength. I started doing things just for me. I wore bold lipstick. I bought flowers for my own kitchen. I hiked on weekends. I danced alone to old records. I wasn't waiting for happiness to find me. I was creating it. And then one night I wrote. I shared a small part of my story on Reddit. Nothing dramatic, just honest. A quiet post about betrayal, healing, and finding yourself after heartbreak. I didn't expect much, but the response was overwhelming. Women from around the world started reaching out. Some were still in the storm, others had just stepped out of it. They shared their stories, their fears, their strength. And I realized I wasn't alone. None of us were. So I kept writing. I shared lessons, little victories, bad days, and breakthroughs. And somehow, through my pain, I became a voice others could hold on to. I never planned to become an inspiration. I just refused to stay silent. While I was learning to fly again, Ben was sinking. I heard from mutual friends that things between him and Ava didn't last. She moved on quickly. Apparently, she had a pattern. He wasn't special. Just another fleeting thrill in her search for something new. And when the excitement wore off, so did she. Ben was left alone. No Lauren, no avenue, just echoes of decisions he couldn't undo. He tried reaching out again. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him, but because I didn't owe him access to the woman I became without him. His regret was heavy, but it wasn't mine to carry. Some mistakes are meant to hurt. That's the price of truth. Then, something beautiful happened. About a year later, while attending a local book talk, I met someone. Not the sweep you off your feet type. Just kind, steady. A quiet presence who asked real questions and listened with his whole heart. His name was Daniel. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't push. He simply held space for me to exist. Flawed, healing, growing. And in that space, love slowly returned. Not like lightning, more like sunrise. Gentle, steady, undeniable. We went on long walks, cooked dinner together, read each other our favorite poems. And for the first time, I loved without fear, without begging to be chosen, because I had already chosen myself. Looking back now, I don't regret the pain. I don't regret the nights I cried until sunrise, or the mornings I didn't want to get out of bed. Every scar, every tear, every moment of breaking led me here, to this peace, to this joy, to this version of me I never thought I'd meet. And if I could tell the woman I was, standing in that kitchen, reading that message on Ben's phone, I'd say this: you're going to survive. In fact, you're going to shine. Thank you, past me, for not giving up.